In October of 1894, a black man walked through the front garden of Ashbourne Hall carrying a scorched brass token in one hand and the deed to the mansion in the other. The guards raised their rifles. The orchestra inside kept playing, and through the tall windows, 300 of the richest people in America continued dancing beneath chandeliers paid for with railroad money, prison labor, and secrets. The stranger did not raise his hands. He did not step back. He looked at the captain of security and said, "Tell Julian Caldwell the house remembers Ruth." The captain went pale. Ruth Mercer had been dead for 31 years. Her name had been forbidden inside Ashbourne Hall for almost as long. Yet, before midnight, that dead woman's son would stand at the center of the ballroom, open a ledger the Caldwell family had killed, to protect and prove that the mansion did not belong to the dynasty celebrating inside it. It belonged to him, not because they welcomed him, not because America had suddenly become fair, but because Isaiah Mercer had spent 29 years learning the language powerful men trusted more than blood, contracts, bonds, mortgages, and proof. To understand how an enslaved boy became the creditor of the family that owned his mother, we have to go back to a sugar estate on the Mississippi River, to a locked accounting room, and to the night a woman discovered that walls can keep secrets only until someone learns where to strike them. Cypress Bend covered nearly 8,000 acres outside St. Francisville, Louisiana. In 1852, it belonged to Gideon Caldwell, a planter, shipping investor, and part owner of a short railroad line connecting the river landings to New Orleans. 286 enslaved people cut cane, boiled sugar, repaired levees, tended horses, cooked meals, raised children, and buried the dead there. Gideon called Cypress Bend a business. The people trapped on it called it the world. Ruth Mercer worked in the main house. She was 23, dark-skinned, quiet, and so precise with numbers that the house steward sometimes made her check invoices. He could not balance himself. She had learned to read by listening outside lessons meant for Gideon's sons. She learned arithmetic from freight receipts. She learned the moods of the household from footsteps in the corridor. And she learned early that being useful to powerful people did not make her safe from them. Gideon noticed her intelligence first. Then he noticed everything else. No one at Cypress Bend asked why Ruth began being summoned to the accounting room after dark. No one asked why she returned to the quarters with her eyes fixed on the ground. Enslaved people understood the difference between a secret and a danger. A secret could be spoken quietly. A danger had to be survived. In February of 1853, Ruth gave birth to a son. She named him Isaiah. His skin was lighter than hers. His eyes were the same gray-green as Gideon Caldwell's, and the shape of his left ear matched the small hooked fold that ran through every Caldwell portrait in the house. The resemblance was not subtle. Gideon's wife, Margaret, saw it. The steward saw it. Gideon's older son, Julian, saw it. Julian was 11 years old at the time. He stared into the cradle for almost a full minute, then asked his father why the baby looked like them. Gideon slapped him hard enough to split his lip. That was the first lesson Julian learned about Isaiah Mercer. The boy was not to be acknowledged. The second lesson came years later. Unacknowledged did not mean harmless. Ruth raised Isaiah in a one-room cabin behind the smokehouse. The roof leaked. The floor was packed earth. Their winter blanket had been patched so many times that none of the original cloth remained. But every night Ruth gave him something the Caldwells never intended him to possess. Information. She taught him letters from torn shipping labels. She taught him figures with dried beans. She made him read the marks on sugar barrels, memorize freight rates, and calculate how many pounds disappeared between the plantation scale and the buyer's receipt. Numbers don't bow, she told him. Men can lie about who you are. Paper can lie too, if the wrong man holds the pen. But when two records disagree, somebody left a door open. Isaiah did not fully understand. He remembered the sentence anyway. By the time he was 9, he could total a column faster than the assistant bookkeeper. By 10, he understood that Cypress Bend's wealth did not come only from sugar. Gideon Caldwell moved money through warehouses, rail shares, and shipping contracts. He borrowed against next year's crop. He insured cargo twice. He bribed inspectors to report dry warehouses after flood water had already reached the lower floors. He recorded one set of numbers for his partners and another for himself. Ruth knew because she cleaned the accounting room. She knew which cabinet held the private books. She knew that the red leather ledger never appeared when visitors were present. And she knew that Julian, now a young man, had begun using that ledger to frighten his own father. Julian Caldwell grew into the kind of man who smiled only when someone else was afraid. He had a narrow face, pale eyes, and a talent for finding weakness. He beat stable boys for moving too slowly. He forced debtors to sign away land they could have saved. He once ordered an injured field hand back to the cane rows because, in Julian's words, a broken rib still leaves 2 working arms. Gideon was ruthless. Julian enjoyed it. That difference mattered. In the spring of 1861, war reached Louisiana first as rumor, then as uniforms, then as shortages. White men left Cypress Bend to join Confederate units. Food prices rose. River traffic became dangerous. The enslaved people heard whispers that Union gunboats were moving south and that freedom might follow them. Julian heard the same whispers and became more violent. He increased patrols. He locked away tools. He ordered families separated across the estate so no large group could plan an escape. Isaiah was 8. He watched men with rifles circle the quarters at night and understood that a system did not become gentler when it felt itself dying. It became desperate. That summer, Gideon Caldwell's health began to fail. He had chest pains, coughing fits, and one collapse in the accounting room that left him unable to speak for almost an hour. A lawyer from New Orleans arrived twice in 3 months. Each time, Ruth was ordered to bring coffee and then leave. Each time, she remained close enough to hear pieces of the conversation through the service passage. On the second visit, she heard Isaiah's name. Not the boy, not Ruth's child, Isaiah. Gideon was dictating a codicil to his will. He acknowledged Isaiah as his natural son. He ordered that Ruth and Isaiah be freed at his death. He placed $32,000 in trust for the boy and assigned him a 1/6 interest in the Caldwell River and Rail Company once he reached 30 years of age. It was not justice. It was not repentance. It was a rich man trying to negotiate with his conscience before the lights went out. But it was legal recognition, and Julian could not allow it. Ruth understood the danger immediately. She also understood that a single signed document could disappear, so she began collecting proof. Not everything, only what mattered. A page showing the trust account number, a shipping letter bearing Gideon's private seal, a note from the lawyer confirming the codicil, and 3 entries from the red ledger documenting payments to judges, patrol captains, and a Louisiana broker who continued importing enslaved people through Cuba decades after the Atlantic trade had been outlawed. Ruth copied what she could onto thin onion paper and hid the pages inside the hollow base of a broken stair post. Then she stole one object from Gideon's desk, a small brass deposit token stamped with a crescent moon and the number 17. It belonged to a private box at Union Mercantile Trust in New Orleans. Gideon kept duplicate legal papers there. Ruth wrapped the token in cloth and gave it to an older laundress named Esther Bell. "If anything happens to me," Ruth whispered, "bury this beneath the cypress with the split trunk. 3 roots point east. Put it under the middle one." Esther did not ask what the token opened. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes the most valuable thing a person could do was remember instructions exactly. Julian discovered the codicil before Gideon died. No one ever learned whether the lawyer betrayed Gideon or whether Julian searched the accounting room. But on the evening of May 7th, 1863, Julian met privately with the overseer, Wade Barlow. A kitchen girl saw money change hands. A stable boy heard Julian say, "No mother, no claimant." Just after midnight, Ruth's cabin caught fire. Isaiah woke beneath a roof already burning. Smoke pressed down like a ceiling. His mother was at the door, trying to lift the wooden latch, but someone had driven an iron spike through it from the outside. Isaiah grabbed a stool. He struck the shutter once, twice. The wood split on the third blow. Ruth pushed him through the opening first. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up screaming for her. She tried to follow. A roof beam fell between them. The sound she made did not sound human. Isaiah reached through the flames until the skin on his forearms blistered. Ruth crawled close enough to seize his wrist. Her face was blackened with smoke. Her voice was almost gone. "Esther," she said, 17. Then her grip loosened. The roof collapsed. The overseer arrived after the cabin was fully involved. Julian arrived after him. They stood together beyond the heat, watching. Isaiah saw them. He saw Wade Barlow's coat sleeve dusted with lamp oil. He saw Julian's boots clean despite the mud, and he saw the expression on Julian's face. Not shock, not regret, relief. That was the moment Isaiah stopped thinking of Cypress Bend as a place. It became a body. The main house was its face. The ledgers were its memory. The locked rooms were its teeth. And somewhere inside that body, his mother had left a wound that had not yet opened. Esther found Isaiah before dawn. She hid him in the laundry cellar while the overseer searched the quarters. For 3 days, he stayed behind stacked soap barrels, drinking water from a cracked cup and listening to men discuss whether his body had burned completely. On the 4th night, Esther led him to the split cypress. They dug beneath the middle root. The brass token lay where she had buried it. Its edges were green with soil. Its face carried the number 17. Esther closed Isaiah's fingers around it. "Your mother said this was a door," she told him. "But a door ain't freedom unless you live long enough to reach it." Isaiah was 10 years old. He wanted to run immediately. Esther refused. Union troops had not reached them. The roads were patrolled. Black children traveling alone were captured, sold, or killed. So Isaiah waited. He worked. He endured Wade Barlow's beatings. He memorized every wagon route leaving the estate. He watched the river, and beneath his shirt, tied against his skin, he carried the brass token. Gideon Caldwell died in January of 1864. The codicil was never read publicly. Julian claimed his father had left no valid amendments. The New Orleans lawyer who drafted the document closed his office and moved to Texas. The trust account remained untouched. Ruth and Isaiah remained listed in the plantation inventory. Julian inherited Cypress Bend, the warehouses, and the Caldwell River shares. He also inherited the Red Ledger. What he did not inherit was peace. The war moved closer. Union forces controlled more of the river. Confederate currency collapsed. Enslaved people fled whenever they could. In April of 1865, news reached Cypress Bend that Richmond had fallen and Lee had surrendered. A week later, Federal soldiers arrived and announced that the people on the estate were free. Some cried, some prayed, some simply walked. Isaiah went first to the split cypress. He pressed his palm against the trunk. Then he looked toward the main house. He was 12 years old. He had no shoes worth naming, no money, and no family left except Esther. But he had the token. He had his mother's lessons, and he knew something Julian Caldwell did not. A house that burns one witness does not erase the record. It only teaches the next witness to make copies. Isaiah left Cypress Bend with a column of freed families heading toward Baton Rouge. He carried Esther's spare shirt, a tin cup, and the brass token. For the first 2 years of freedom, he worked wherever a black boy could survive. He unloaded riverboats. He stacked cotton. He cleaned boilers. He slept in sheds, church basements, and once inside an empty sugar barrel during a storm. At night, he attended lessons run by a freedmen's school in a damaged Methodist chapel. He read newspapers aloud until his voice stopped shaking. He copied contracts by hand. He learned that a comma could move a debt from one man to another. He learned that interest could work like a chain if you owed it, and like a machine if it was owed to you. At 16, he found work with a Scottish warehouse clerk named Malcolm Kerr, who had lost 2 sons in the war and most of his business in the blockade. Kerr was not generous. He was practical. Isaiah could calculate freight losses faster than any man on the dock, so Kerr promoted him from laborer to tally clerk. That change doubled Isaiah's pay and multiplied the insults he received. White stevedores refused to take numbers from a black teenager. Ship captains accused him of cheating whenever the count favored the warehouse. One man struck him with a belaying pin and broke 2 teeth. Isaiah returned to work the next morning, not because he had forgiven anything, because he was studying the system that moved wealth. He watched damaged cargo get sold for pennies. He watched owners abandon timber shipments when storage fees exceeded value. He watched insurance companies auction salvage without knowing what could be repaired. At 19, he used every dollar he had saved to buy a flooded load of cypress boards no one else wanted. He dried them in a rented yard. He cut away the ruined ends. Then he sold the usable lumber to builders repairing storm-damaged homes. He tripled his money. He did it again with iron fittings, then brick, then rail ties. By 1874, Isaiah Mercer owned 2 storage yards and a small transport company serving Baton Rouge and New Orleans. By 1880, he supplied timber and masonry to depots across 3 states. By 1886, his companies employed more than 400 workers, most of them black men shut out of skilled contracts elsewhere. He paid in cash. He promoted from within. He required every foreman to teach at least one apprentice to read a ledger. People called him fortunate. They did not see the 19-hour days. They did not see him reading bond notices at 2 in the morning. They did not see the brass token on his desk. and they did not know that every Caldwell Company report was filed in a locked cabinet beside it. Isaiah never forgot Julian. He tracked the family's expansion through newspapers, court filings, and railroad circulars. After the war, Julian sold Cypress Bend and moved north. He bought failing rail lines during the Panic of 1873. He underpaid immigrant crews, leased convict labor from southern states, and replaced sound bridge iron with cheaper material while bribing inspectors to approve it. Caldwell Consolidated Rail became one of the fastest growing transport companies in the country. Its profits built Ashbourne Hall outside Philadelphia. Its marble staircase came from Italy. Its carved oak came from forests Julian had never seen. Its ballroom ceiling was painted with angels, and beneath all of it sat debt. Isaiah noticed the debt first. Julian expanded too quickly. He financed new track with layers of bonds tied to future freight revenue. He borrowed against one property to buy another. He created shell companies that purchased supplies from Caldwell-controlled firms at inflated prices. The empire looked enormous. Its foundations were paper. Isaiah began buying that paper quietly. $1,000 here, $5,000 there. Whenever frightened investors sold Caldwell bonds below value, Isaiah purchased them through separate agents. A Boston attorney bought some. A Baltimore bank bought others. A holding company in Ohio bought the rest. No one saw the pattern. By 1890, Isaiah controlled nearly 18% of Caldwell Consolidated's senior debt. Not enough to command the company. Enough to hear the walls creak. The brass token still opened nothing. Union Mercantile Trust had merged twice and changed names. Its old records were incomplete. Box 17 did not appear in public inventories. Then, in the winter of 1891, Esther Bell found Isaiah. She was nearly 80. Her back was bent. Her hands shook. But her memory had not failed. She arrived at his New Orleans office carrying a sewing basket and a letter written in a woman's careful hand. The writer was Beatrice Caldwell, Gideon's second wife. Beatrice had married him after Margaret's death. She had lived at Cypress Bend during the final years of the war. She had seen Ruth. She had known about the codicil. And she had spent 27 years carrying one fact Julian did not know she possessed. The original Union Mercantile Trust books had not been destroyed. They had been moved to a private archive in Philadelphia after the merger. Box 17 was still active. Its access file listed two identifiers, Gideon Caldwell's seal and the brass token. Isaiah read the letter 3 times. Then he looked at Esther. Why now? Esther's eyes hardened. Because Beatrice is dying, and because Julian is marrying his daughter to a man who owns half the judges in Pennsylvania. She says once that marriage happens, nobody will touch him. Isa booked a northbound train that afternoon. Beatrice lived in a narrow townhouse far from Ashbourne Hall. Julian paid her expenses but rarely visited. She was 76, pale, and weakened by illness. When Isaiah entered her room, she stared at his face for a long time. You have Gideon's eyes, she said. Isaiah did not sit. My mother had her own eyes. Beatrice lowered hers. Yes, she whispered. She did. There was no easy forgiveness between them. Beatrice had known Ruth was being abused. She had known Julian feared Isaiah. She had seen Wade Barlow leave the main house with money the night of the fire, and she had said nothing. Fear had kept her alive. Silence had kept Julian safe. She did not ask Isaiah to absolve her. She gave him the archive location, a notarized statement, and the imprint of Gideon's seal. Then she told him what Julian had built into Ashbourne Hall. The East Library has a false wall behind the third bookcase, she said. Gideon designed the compartment at Cypress Bend, and Julian copied it. He keeps the red ledger there. He also keeps letters from men who owe him crimes. Why would he keep them? Because men like Julian do not trust loyalty. They trust fear. Isaiah finally sat. What else is in box 17? Beatrice's breathing became shallow. A duplicate codicil, the trust certificate, and Ruth's copies. Isaiah felt the room narrow around him. My mother's papers? She hid them in the stair post. I found them after the fire. I should have given them to someone. Instead, I put them in Gideon's box and told myself I was protecting them. You were protecting yourself? Yes. The answer came without defense. Beatrice reached for his hand but stopped before touching it. Julian believes fire ends a story, she said. Show him he is wrong. The archive officer at Commonwealth Trust examined the token, the seal imprint, and Beatrice's affidavit. Then he disappeared behind a steel door. He returned carrying a narrow tin box covered in dust. Number 17. Inside lay a duplicate codicil signed by Gideon Caldwell and witnessed by two men. A trust certificate for $32,000, invested over the years and now worth more than $190,000. 3 pages in Ruth's handwriting. A letter from the New Orleans lawyer admitting Julian had threatened his family, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my son, Isaiah." Isaiah opened that envelope last. The letter inside was not an apology. Gideon wrote about blood, inheritance, and duty, as if naming a wrong were the same as repairing it. He admitted Isaiah was his son. He admitted Ruth had never consented to the relationship. He admitted Julian knew about the codicil, and in one sentence, almost as an afterthought, he wrote that if harm came to Ruth or Isaiah, Julian should be investigated first. Isaiah folded the letter carefully. For 38 years, he had imagined proof would feel like thunder. It felt like weight. The codicil created a legal claim, but not a simple one. Louisiana law had changed. The estate had been distributed. Properties had been sold. Decades had passed. Julian's lawyers could delay a lawsuit for years. Some courts might refuse to honor an inheritance tied to a formerly enslaved child. Others might accept the document but limit recovery. The truth was powerful. The law was uncertain. Isaiah did not confuse the two, so he changed the battlefield. He did not file suit immediately. He bought more Caldwell debt. The financial panic of 1893 gave him the opening. Freight revenue fell. 2 Caldwell subsidiaries missed interest payments. Bondholders panicked. Isaiah's agents purchased senior notes for less than 60 cents on the dollar. By the spring of 1894, he controlled 31% of the company's first lien debt and held the mortgage note on Ashbourne Hall through Mercer Industrial Trust. Julian Caldwell still hosted senators. He still appeared in newspapers beside governors. He still believed Ashbourne Hall was the symbol of his permanence. But on paper, the house had already begun sliding toward Isaiah. The final piece remained inside the East Library, the red ledger. Beatrice could not enter Ashbourne. Esther was too old, but Julian's daughter, Clara Caldwell, could. Clara was 24. She had grown up beneath the painted angels, trained to smile through dinners and ignore what servants whispered. Julian had arranged her marriage to Preston Vale, a railroad lobbyist, 40 years old and twice widowed. Clara did not love him. That did not matter to Julian. The marriage would connect Caldwell money to political protection. Beatrice sent Clara a copy of Ruth's page. Clara read the entry ordering payment to Wade Barlow. Then she read a second entry concerning the Greywater Bridge. In 1888, Caldwell engineers warned that several iron pins were defective. Julian ordered the report suppressed to avoid closing the line. The bridge failed in winter. 43 workers and passengers died. The company blamed ice. Clara had attended the memorial. Her father had stood before grieving families and called the disaster an act of God. The ledger called it a savings of $87,000. Clara agreed to help Isaiah. She mapped the East Library. She copied Julian's schedule. She learned the mechanism of the false wall. And she gave Isaiah something he had not expected, a date. October 18th, 1894, the night of the Ashbourne Founders Ball. Julian planned to announce Clara's engagement and a merger that would refinance the company. Bankers, publishers, investors, and public officials would all be in one room. If the ledger was revealed there, Julian could not bury it quietly. Isaiah prepared for 6 weeks. He assembled certified copies of the codicil. He obtained affidavits from Beatrice and the former kitchen girl who had seen Julian pay Wade Barlow. He hired attorneys in Louisiana and Pennsylvania. He arranged for 3 newspapers to receive sealed evidence if he failed to appear after midnight, and he secured a court order recognizing Mercer Industrial Trust as the holder of the Ashbourne mortgage in default. He was not planning a speech. He was building a structure Julian could not burn. Julian struck first. 4 nights before the ball, Isaiah's Philadelphia warehouse caught fire. The blaze began in 3 separate places. It moved too quickly to be accidental. Isaiah arrived as workers dragged hoses across the yard. The office roof collapsed before anyone could enter. His chief bookkeeper, Daniel Price, was trapped inside. Daniel had been with Isaiah for 17 years. He had taught apprentices, raised 2 daughters, and carried the duplicate bond registers with him whenever the company traveled. They found his body at dawn. The police called the fire suspicious. No one was arrested. Isaiah stood in the ash until morning, holding Daniel's scorched pocket watch. For the first time in decades, he felt 10 years old again. Smoke, timber, a man using fire because he believed the dead could not testify. Clara sent word that Julian knew about Box 17. He had hired men to seize Isaiah's papers and kill him before the ball. Esther begged Isaiah to leave Philadelphia. His attorneys urged delay. The lenders wanted discretion. Even Clara warned him that Ashbourne would be guarded. Isaiah listened to all of them. Then he opened Daniel's watch. Inside the back cover, Daniel had tucked a tiny strip of paper. It listed the locations of every duplicate file. Daniel had anticipated an attack. He had made copies. Ruth's lesson had crossed a generation. A house that burns one witness only teaches the next witness to make copies. Isaiah buried Daniel on October 17th. The next evening, he dressed in a charcoal frock coat, tied the brass token beneath his collar, and placed the court order inside his breast pocket. He did not enter through the servant's door. He did not disguise himself. He arrived at Ashbourne Hall in his own carriage and walked through the front gate under the full light of the lamps. The guards surrounded him in the garden. Their captain demanded his name. Isaiah gave him the message. Tell Julian Caldwell the house remembers Ruth. The orchestra stopped less than a minute later. Julian appeared at the top of the marble steps. He was 52, silver-haired, and still handsome in the severe way newspapers admired. For 1 second, he looked frightened. Then the old confidence returned. "You are trespassing," he said. Isaiah held up the folded court order. "No, I am inspecting collateral." A murmur moved through the guests gathered behind Julian. The words did what a threat could not. They made rich men pay attention. Julian descended the steps. "You think a purchase note makes you my equal?" Isaiah looked past him at the carved doors, the polished stone, the windows blazing with light. "No," he said. "Your debt makes you mine." Julian ordered the guards to remove him. Before they could move, a federal marshal stepped from Isaiah's carriage with 2 deputies. 3 attorneys followed, then reporters. Isaiah had not come alone. He had brought procedure. Julian's face changed. Violence was easy in a warehouse. It was harder under gas lamps, with witnesses taking notes. The marshal served notice of default. The Ashbourne mortgage had missed 2 required payments. Mercer Industrial Trust had the right to inspect secured property and records related to the lien. Julian laughed too loudly. "This is theater," Isaiah answered. "Then let us invite the audience inside." The ballroom filled again, but no one danced. Guests formed a wide circle beneath the chandeliers. At its center stood Julian Caldwell, Isaiah Mercer, the marshal, and a table brought from the library. Clara was nowhere in sight. Isaiah felt the first turn of fear. Without her, the ledger might remain hidden. Julian saw it. "You came for something," he said softly, "and it is not the house." Isaiah did not answer. Julian leaned closer. "Your mother screamed my name before the roof came down." The room around Isaiah disappeared. For 31 years, he had imagined the words he would use when Julian finally admitted it. None came. Julian smiled. He believed silence meant victory. Then a panel in the east wall opened. Clara stepped into the ballroom carrying the red leather ledger. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not. "No," she said. Ruth Mercer screamed for her son. Julian turned as if struck. Clara placed the ledger on the table. Beside it, she laid a packet of letters tied with black ribbon. "I found these behind the 3rd bookcase," she said. "They include the Greywater report, payments to inspectors, and instructions to destroy company correspondence after the bridge failed." Julian crossed the floor toward her. The marshal blocked him. Isaiah opened the ledger. The first pages recorded bribes from the 1850s. Later pages listed payments to patrol captains, labor agents, judges, and railroad inspectors. The handwriting changed over the years. The method did not. Money went out. Silence came back. Isaiah read one entry aloud. "May 7th, 1863. Paid W. Barlow $400. Removal of Ruth Mercer and issue before codicil execution. Cabin loss acceptable." The ballroom went still, not quiet. Still. Isaiah placed Gideon's codicil beside the ledger. "This document names me as Gideon Caldwell's son. It ordered my freedom, established a trust, and assigned me an interest in the family company." Julian Caldwell suppressed it. 4 months later, my mother was burned alive. Julian shouted that the documents were forged. One of Isaiah's attorneys produced the archive certification. Another produced Beatrice Caldwell's sworn statement. A third opened the trust register showing uninterrupted investment of the original $32,000. Then Isaiah read the Greywater entry. October 9th, 1888. Engineer recommends closure. Replacement cost, $87,000. Delay authorized. Public explanation, ice failure. A woman near the front began to cry. Her brother had died on that bridge. A banker backed away from Julian. Then another. Investors understood what came next. Fraud invalidated disclosures. Hidden liabilities endangered the merger. The refinancing Julian planned to announce that night was collapsing in real time. Isaiah placed the deed assignment and mortgage note on the table. The Caldwell companies are in default. This house secures part of that debt. I hold the senior claim. Julian stared at the documents. You bought my home? Isaiah's answer was calm. I bought the paper you sold when you believed no one like me could read it. Julian looked around the ballroom for allies. Men who had praised him an hour earlier studied the floor. Politicians moved toward the doors. The orchestra members lowered their instruments. Power did not leave him dramatically. It left one calculation at a time. Julian reached inside his coat. A deputy drew his weapon. Clara stepped back. Julian's hand emerged, holding a small pistol. He pointed it at Isaiah. For a moment, the entire room balanced on one breath. Isaiah did not move. Julian's arm trembled. You should have died in that cabin. Isaiah looked at him across the table. You have spent your whole life mistaking survival for permission. Julian cocked the pistol. Clara spoke from behind him. Father, he turned his head, only slightly. It was enough. The marshal seized his wrist. The pistol fired into the ceiling. Plaster rained down from the painted angels. Guests screamed and scattered. Deputies forced Julian to the floor. Isaiah remained standing beside the ledger. He did not strike him. He did not shout. He watched the man who had ruled through fear discover what fear looked like when it no longer obeyed him. Julian was arrested first for assault and illegal weapons discharge. The larger charges followed: fraud, conspiracy, evidence destruction, bribery, criminal negligence in the Greywater deaths, and, after Louisiana investigators reopened the 1863 fire, conspiracy to murder Ruth Mercer. Wade Barlow had died years earlier, but the ledger, the lawyer's letter, Beatrice's statement, and testimony from two surviving witnesses formed a chain strong enough to reach across 3 decades. Julian's attorneys delayed. They attacked Isaiah's birth. They attacked Ruth's character. They claimed a black industrialist had manufactured the scandal to seize a white family's property. But they could not explain the bank archive. They could not explain the trust account. They could not explain Julian's own entries in the red ledger. And they could not explain why 3 separate copies of the Greywater engineering report carried the same suppressed warning. The merger collapsed within 48 hours. Caldwell consolidated shares fell by more than half in a week. Creditors filed claims. Directors resigned. Workers came forward with evidence of payroll theft and unsafe track. Families of the Greywater dead filed suit. Julian Caldwell was convicted on financial and conspiracy charges the following year. The murder case ended without a separate verdict after his other sentences guaranteed he would die in prison. He lived 6 more years. No family member attended his burial. Ashbourne Hall entered foreclosure in the spring of 1895. Isaiah could have sold it. The land alone was worth a fortune. He could have torn it down, auctioned the marble, and scattered the Caldwell name into salvage yards. Instead, he walked through the empty rooms with Esther Bell. She was 83 now. Her steps were slow. When they reached the ballroom, she looked up at the damaged ceiling where Julian's bullet had broken one of the painted angels. "What will you do with it?" she asked. Isaiah listened to their footsteps echo. For decades, the house had been built to make some people feel enormous and everyone else feel small. Its library had held books servants were forbidden to touch. Its dining room had hosted men who profited from black labor while debating whether black citizens deserved schools. Its walls had protected a ledger that counted human suffering as expense. Isaiah placed the brass token on the ballroom table. I am going to make the walls tell the truth. The Ruth Mercer Institute opened in September of 1896. Its first class included 82 students. Most were black teenagers from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and the rural South. Some had lost parents. Some worked nights. Some arrived unable to read. The institute taught mathematics, bookkeeping, printing, carpentry, rail engineering, nursing, and law. Isaiah used the recovered trust, the Ashbourne property, and a portion of his own fortune to endow it. He required every student to learn both a trade and the language of contracts. Skill feeds you, he told them. Paper protects what skill builds. The East Library became an archive. Ruth's copied pages were displayed beneath glass. Gideon's codicil sat beside the brass token from box 17. The red ledger was preserved not as a relic of the Caldwells, but as evidence of what respectable rooms can hide. Clara Caldwell refused her arranged marriage. She testified in every major case against her father. Then she left the family name behind and worked for the Institute's legal clinic, helping laborers read wage agreements before they signed them. Esther lived long enough to see the first-class graduate. At the ceremony, Isaiah asked her to present the diplomas. She protested that she had never attended school. Isaiah smiled. You kept the first document safe. Esther stood beneath the chandeliers and handed certificates to young men and women whose grandparents had been property. When the final student crossed the platform, the entire hall rose for her. Isaiah never used the Caldwell name. He did not need it. The courts eventually recognized his status as Gideon's acknowledged son, but by then the title meant less than the work. He had not fought to enter the dynasty. He had fought to expose what the dynasty called inheritance. Years later, visitors asked why he kept the scorch marks on the brass token. He could have polished them away. He refused. Clean metal forgets the fire, he said. Isaiah Mercer died in 1927 at the age of 74. By then, the Ruth Mercer Institute had educated more than 3,000 students. Its graduates became surveyors, teachers, accountants, nurses, printers, lawyers, and engineers. Some built businesses. Some organized workers. Some returned south to open schools in places where Ruth Mercer had once been forbidden to hold a book. On the morning of Isaiah's funeral, students opened every door in Ashbourne Hall, not just the front entrance, every door. The service was held in the garden, where guards had once aimed rifles at him. The brass token rested on his coffin, and above the main doors, carved into the stone, were the words Isaiah had chosen for the school. A house is only as honorable as the truth it allows inside. For 40 years, Ashbourne Hall had swallowed names. Under Isaiah Mercer, it learned to speak them. The Caldwells built walls to keep the truth out. Ruth's son opened the doors, and the house remembered.